Good morning and welcome to Como Vanguard. This is the companion show to the written publication available on Substack. For all things Como Vanguard, you can go to comovanguard.com. As always, I am joined here by my co-host, David Lyle. David, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Nick. It's good to see you again, and I'm curious as to if we have any unfinished business from any of the previous episodes.
We always have unfinished business, but only so much time in the day. Today, we are joined by a very special guest. De'Carlon Seewood, the city manager of Columbia itself, is joining us today. De'Carlon, how are you?
Great. Good morning.
Thank you for joining us. I know you have a busy schedule. There's never a dull moment in City Hall.
That's my favorite line.
So for our listeners, we'll start off with De'Carlon, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple minutes, just tell them about yourself. Obviously, you're city manager, where you came from, how you got here, and what is being city manager.
Sure. So I've been in Columbia for about 6 years. I've been city manager for 4. Before that, I was a deputy city manager. I've worked in local government for about 30 years. And so I got my BA from Rockhurst College in Kansas City. Nothing beats a Jesuit education. I got my MPA from the University of Missouri Truman School. At the Truman School, I took in a city, what part of our process, you had to do an internship. So I interned in Osage Beach. And I was supposed to do a 3-month summer internship. I ended up being there for a year, and that's why I fell in love with local government. From Osage Beach, I went to Fulton. From Fulton, I went to Ferguson. Then from Ferguson, I went to Berkeley as a city manager, and that was after 10 years in local government. From Berkeley, I went to Richmond Park, Illinois, and so I was in Illinois for about 6 years. And then when Mike Brown got killed, I went back to Ferguson as their city manager. And so I was in Ferguson for 3 years before coming here.
And you came to Columbia as deputy city manager.
Correct.
Under John Glasscock then.
Yes.
And how was that experience?
It was great. And to be honest, when John hired me as the deputy city manager, his statement was, "Hey, you're going to be the next city manager." I was like, "No, I don't want to be the next city manager. I'm fine being a deputy. That's a great role, and that's the position I want to be in." After COVID, John decided to retire, and so that left a vacancy. And I was on the bubble about did I want to actually pursue being a city manager here. A lot of the department directors kind of pushed and pushed and pushed. And so I applied and the council hired me.
I think that's kind of interesting because at the time I thought that you had been brought on by City Manager Glasscock to be the city manager.
That was his goal, yes. That was not my goal.
It was not what you were thinking at that time. See, that kind of that's an interesting answer to me because I thought that you might have always had that as a part of the design. Has the 4 years to almost 5 or so as being city manager, how has that moved in your mind speed-wise?
It's felt like 10 years. Columbia is a great city, but we're a busy city. And we're growing and we're doing so much, and it's that constant. And like a lot of times in city government, you have those high weeks, and then you have those low days where there's not a whole lot going on. Here, we don't have a whole lot of days where there's not a whole lot going on.
It's that type of environment where when it's quiet, it's too quiet.
Yes.
Nothing's about to happen.
Absolutely.
For sure. Well, I think I may have buried the lead for our listeners that the reason City Manager De'Carlon Seewood is joining us today is we are here to discuss his State of the City address. Just for context for folks, we are recording this in advance of his address. It will not be coming out to you, the listener, until after he's given that. So we appreciate him giving us this opportunity and therefore giving listeners the opportunity to hear this and discuss it ahead of time. So with that, we can dive straight into it. And I think the best place to start on it, reading through your address, is really with the overarching theme. You labeled that as building a stronger Columbia together. My interpretation is that this entire speech is really about what that means. But I'm curious if you wouldn't mind telling listeners, what does that mean to you and why did you go with it?
That's absolutely it. It's really about, it's we, the city. And so it's really about Columbia coming together. So nothing can be done just by city staff. It has to be the city staff. It has to be our residents. It has to be our community members. It has to be those public organizations. It has to be a partnership. Without the school, the chamber, the county, we would not be successful. And so we all have to kind of buckle up together in order to get these things moving. And I think we've done a great job of actually collaborating with people. And that collaboration is what's making Columbia successful.
How do you put I know I'm kind of backing up a step here. How do you put a State of the City address together?
So it's really sitting down with all the department directors. It's talking about, okay, what have we done this year? What are the things that we're most proud of? What are the things that really stand out? It says, okay, here's an accomplishment that we want to talk about. And from that process, we start putting together the speech, and we just go from step by step by step. But it's really highlighting the things that we've seen as being, okay, here's the things that stand out to us that says, okay, here's something that I want to stand on and say, in 2025, we did this. And we're extremely proud of those actions.
I think that there are a lot of people in the city who do pay attention to the State of the City address, but there are a whole lot of people that have no idea that you're going to be delivering this, that you ever deliver one of these, and don't know what's inside of it. What would you like to come out that doesn't come out more often in the news and in people paying attention?
I think it's the fact that when we look at the city of Columbia, and when we talk about being a progressive community, when we talk about moving forward on different processes, when we talk about embracing engagement, I really want the community members to realize that they have a stake in everything that we do. Without their voices, without their energy, we cannot be successful. And so they have to empower us to do the things that make us successful. So it's really getting involved and being part of those conversations. It's easy to be on the sideline and say, this local government doesn't work for me, but local government is the one place where you have more opportunity to direct what happens.
In your address, you talk about shared responsibility and another shared understanding, which I think I understand. And then you move into talking about engagement, and you're talking about the engagement that you have, that the community has with the people who are put into the responsibility of directing what that engagement leads to. Where do most people get engaged in the city?
That's a great question. So it used to be, the thought was that there was a council meeting. And it's not. No one wants to go to a council meeting. Those are long meetings and they're not always exciting. It's the engagement happens in their neighborhoods. It's going to where people are. It's meeting them in those locations to talk about what they're concerned about. Now, we've started doing block parties where we're going to a park, and we're going to a park that's close to a neighborhood, and we invite the residents over. Have a hot dog and come talk to us about what you're concerned about. We started meeting in like community centers and just really reaching out to our residents to say, we want you involved. Ideally, it's meeting people where they are so they can be involved in those processes.
How do you get different people involved?
And that's the hard part, because local government is not always sexy. And people don't tend to think, okay, I have a stake in that unless it's something that really impacts me. If we're not fixing the street in front of their house, they really aren't concerned about what's happening down the road. So it's really working really hard to go knock on doors and say, hey, we want you involved. So one of the programs we started was a community connectors program. And those are residents who are empowered to go talk to their neighbors and try to invite their neighbors to our different events and different activities.
I think you touched on a good point that was very, very much highlighted in your address, which is really community engagement as a whole. And my reaction to reading through it was thinking about just how much the city's outreach and engagement efforts has drastically changed in the time you've been city manager. I mean, I was writing it down, right? Like, it was everything from the community summit is now a thing, community survey, civic academy, community connectors, as you just mentioned, let's talk local, those kind of town halls that staff and city council members co-host in a
Yes.
way. Why why has that change happened under your tenure?
What I realized is people weren't engaged. They didn't know what was going on. And people felt disinvested from the organization. They felt like the city didn't care. And so it's really trying to show people, here's what we do. This is how we do it. Well, the first thing we started was a civic academy. And it was because a lot of people really didn't understand how our local government operates. So let's talk about it. Let's look at it. We have a lot of people that talk about they want to see transparency in government. Well, we want to be as transparent as possible. We want you to understand our processes. We want you to be part of our processes. And so in order to do that, we have to really go out and talk to people. And they're not coming to our meetings. And so we have to go out to them.
So it's one of those things I think you would agree, and I feel like anyone in the city would, which is there's always room for improvement type of positioning, right?
Absolutely.
And so I'm curious, with this, in my opinion, long list of things that the city has done to improve that engagement, what is left on your mind, not on anyone else's mind, but what do you think? If we could also just do this, that would be great. Like, what do you think is another thing? Does the city need another thing?
It's funny because that's kind of what we talk about. One of the things that the communication staff is trying to convince me to do, and we probably will do it, is have coffee with the city manager. And it would just be the city manager at a coffee shop, just meeting with residents who want to just talk about whatever the issue or whatever concern they have. We talk about having more community classroom, doing tours of our facilities, so bringing back those things so people can actually see the operations behind the scenes.
Nick is one of the most plugged in guys to the city functioning that I know, and who is not a paid employee or an elected official. So he does these things. I am a average citizen who rarely would attend and even more rarely speak at a council meeting or come to some of these events. I might come to the community event where you have an open house where you can see what's going to be in the next plans for a neighborhood or for something with Parks and Rec, but that would be also rare. So there are, I think, a large majority of
Hmm.
people hesitate to do some of these things because they see that it's the same people doing
Yes,
these things over and over. You need to have a first timers club.
absolutely. And we get that with the Civic Academy because those are new people every year who've never seen our processes, who kind of get to go through it and kind of understand what we're doing. But you're right. A lot of times you see the same 5 people. And so how do you do something that'll bring out more than those? And so that's the challenge. And those are the things we're trying to figure out. How do we get there?
I would imagine that those people who participate in that academy, they become ambassadors. Once
Absolutely.
they see what the mechanism is and what is behind some of what we see out briefly in the main focus of what's going on with the city, then they go, oh, okay, I understand this much better.
That's it. And it's interesting. I think we open up the next academy in August and we already have a waiting list.
Well, explain the academy. Who is that? How many is it? What's it? What's the
Sure.
engagement?
So it's 8 weeks, and it is a period of time with each individual department. And so you have a public safety day. You'll have a day where it's the city manager. You have a day where it's the mayor. You have a day where you go to the utilities and you go on a facility tour. So either the water treatment plant or the wastewater plant. It's really an opportunity for people to see our operations and really understand what it is and how it is.
Any age group?
Any age group.
And you apply for this and get accepted? Or what?
Absolutely. And so we have
Tuition really high.
So we actually have three programs. So we have one that's a youth academy. We have one that's OSHA, which is with the MU extension, and those are more for seniors. And we have just a regular academy where anybody can apply for it. And the idea is for us to really try to engage as many people as possible.
How many per class?
Usually it's around 25 to 30.
And you try to do how many of those a year?
Try to do 3.
3 a year. Gotcha. Well, a humble plug. If you want more people to come out, I always recommend ice cream.
We did that for our employees. We started having an ice cream social.
All right. It always works. And this is connected to community engagement for sure. One of the new things that's happening right now, a new strategic plan in
Yes.
the works. That is coming up. It is actively happening. Those are in 5-year stints, give or take.
Correct.
Yeah, give or take. There's some leniency there. COVID certainly had an effect on the last one. What's top of your mind for this next 5-year plan where I think on the last one, you would have come into the city manager position specifically, and that one already existed.
Correct.
This is the first one in that case where you are city manager. You've been here now 5 years. You saw through the last strategic plan. What do you want out of the next one?
What I really want is to make sure that as we're setting our priorities and we're setting our goals, that they're actually actionable and they're things that we can kind of show attainment. A lot of times when communities put together a strategic plan, they have these lofty goals and it's pie in the sky, but it's not something that citizens can actually see and say, okay, I understand exactly how we're moving. And so ideally it's talking about those things that we can actually put together a plan that says, okay, in 1 year, we should be able to see this. In 2 years, we should be able to see this. In 3 years, we're here. And in 5 years, we'll start over again. And it's not actually starting over again because most time it will be the same items. It'll be infrastructure. It'll be economics. It'll be public safety. We know the topics are, but it's understanding exactly what are the goals that we're trying to reach in this new term, this new millennium.
It's not an off the wall question, but it is a question that I don't expect to get a really good answer on. Is there a drawback to engagement? And let me rephrase this in a way. I used to be a public school teacher, and it was at a time where parents did not have a lot of engagement with the public schools, but it was starting, and people were advocating for that. I went to a state teachers meeting once where a speaker said, "We need to not promote this because it slows down the process of what we want to do teaching, because then we have too many interferences with what we're trying to do." I get the engagement. I get the importance of that. But I also wonder if there are times when you say, you know what, just let us do our job.
Yes. And so the engagement is extremely important. It does slow down the process. No, the more times you have to go out and reach out to hear community voices, the longer it takes to get through a project. But when that project impacts someone's life, you really want them to be involved in it. You really want to hear their voices. The other down point, or sometimes in engagement, sometimes it's the angry voices. And those angry voices can drown out processes, and they can stall a lot of things. And so it's, how do you balance that? We have to be mindful that we are hired to be part of this community, to help this community move forward. While we may be the subject matter experts, the community belongs to the community members, and they need to be involved in those processes.
I think a good example of this is, and this is kind of a lightning rod one, but it's a significant one, is the Nifong transmission line project,
Absolutely.
which was, correct me if I'm misinterpreting this, DeCarlon. My understanding, and I'm simplifying it, is that the city is now planning to move forward with essentially what was discussed over 10 years ago.
Yes.
And what happened 10 years ago with a completely different city council, completely different city management, really dovetailed to community engagement in that area saying, no, we don't want that. Even though logically from the experts, in terms of what options were practical and could be done, that was kind of the only option. And so here we are 10 years later, new city council, new city management, putting in place something that was needed 10 years ago.
I think that's a great example. So what you have is in Columbia, because there are different utility operators. And so the part of the city where that line's going to go down, they're not Columbia's customers. So they feel like they're not impacted by issues with our electric system. I mean, they're Boone County customers. And so Boone Electric customers. And so that plays part of it. The other part is, sometimes the transmission lines aren't the prettiest thing to see going down your street. And so I get it. I get the thought of, well, wait a minute, is there something better? And so the issue is, how do you talk to your community members to let them know what those impacts are? Because understanding that we're all on the grid. And so while you may be a Boone Electric customer, if there's issues on the Columbia line, it will affect you. If you're an Ameren customer, if there's issues on Boone Electric line, it will affect you. We're all interconnected. And so we have to make sure that the grid is safe. And so this process does just that.
When I see discussions like that, and that is a really good topic, but then also like watching a city council meeting, I'll see oftentimes where there's not any trust. And I think that there has to be trust in the staff and in the people who are the experts who are hired to do the studies and to do what are the ramifications, and to say they have looked at this in detail and in depth, and they have not done it haphazardly or flippantly, and they know what they're doing. That needs to be communicated. And oftentimes I think maybe it is, maybe it's not, but there just has to be a feeling that people know what they're doing who are in positions to make these recommendations and decisions.
But that's exactly it. It's about building trust. If you don't have trust in staff, if you don't have trust in the process, it makes it hard for the process to move forward. And so how do we build that trust? And I think you build that trust by showing people that the things we say we're going to do, we do.
But again, it's the people who don't trust, whose voices oftentimes
Drown
are
out.
the only ones that you're hearing.
Absolutely.
And that's a shame.
Because what happens is, if people are happy or they're satisfied, they don't come out. Those aren't the people that come out to talk. It's the people that are angry, the ones that you see.
That was exactly the point I was going to make to Colin, is that nobody goes to a city council meeting because they're happy.
Correct.
If you're happy, unless you're getting funding from the city, I suppose you see them show up if you're a recipient of city dollars. But otherwise, as an average citizen, you're not showing up to share your appreciation for the roads being paved or plowed or your electricity turning on when you flip a switch. You're showing up when those things don't happen.
Correct.
Right? Or when you don't trust, as we're saying, that something is going to happen the way you think it should. I think this is a good transition for us to infrastructure.
Yes.
Another major point of your address, and obviously a pillar of the services that the city of Columbia provides. Infrastructure is very wide in terms of what we can put in there, but I think just starting with utilities, which again itself is so wide. There's 5 utilities
yes.
in the utilities department.
Yes.
So the big one is the McBain wastewater treatment plant is having improvements finished in the near future after undergoing a very long process that, according to your address, is going to up the production to 32 million gallons a day.
Yes.
Would you share for our listeners how you see that impacting our community?
It's one of the things that people want or need is fresh drinking water. And so how do we make sure that we're treating our water correctly? With this upgrade to the water treatment plant, we're now going to be able to be back at full capacity, where we're treating 32 gallons of water 32 million gallons of water on a daily basis. We'll extend the life of this plant. We will make sure that we're providing the needed service to our residents. Everyone wants safe drinking water. And so having a process to make sure we're doing that is important. And it's interesting. This is one of those projects that was a bond project that had sat dormant for almost a decade. And it's kind of like, let's bring this back to life. Let's make sure that we can move this forward. Residents are saying, hey, we voted on this, where we're at. And so this is us actually making that a reality that our residents have asked for. One part is this is only phase one. There's additional phases that need to occur in order to make sure that we're upgrading our facility.
Will those additional phases be included in that pre-existing bond?
It would probably have to go for another bond because part of that's extremely expensive, but it's about how you treat the water. And
Right.
if we want to change the way we're treating our water.
So speaking of water, another issue, again, this one kind of like the knife on transmission line, relevant especially to the Southwest, water tower,
Yes.
right? That's been long in the making. Honestly, I'm not sure where we're at on that. So I'd love to hear from you. Where is that?
And it's back to the drawing board. We had a location that was picked out, and it was actually a property that was next to a school. The school board was interested in selling it to the city. However, they wanted to hear from the residents, and we had a lot of residents who came out and said, "Not in my backyard." And so they said, "While we may see a need, we don't want it right now." Now, the reality is that if there's a fire, we have enough fire flow to deal with that issue. The issue we have is you have a lot of new homes and a lot of people that are watering their grass, and everyone's watering their grass at the exact same time, which creates pressure issues on that line. And so one of the things we're going to look at doing is doing an irrigation ordinance that will say that if you're on the odd numbers, you have to water your grass on Mondays and Wednesdays. If you're on the evening numbers, you water your grass on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And that way we can mitigate how much pressure we put on our system while we still work through a process of actually delivering that water tower.
Is that type of ordinance something that you see as, and I don't mean to use this word in a critical way, but more as a Band-Aid until the water tower can get done? And I mean that in terms of foresee it if and when the water tower happens, that ordinance being repealed, or do you see that as a long-term?
I think that's a long-term ordinance because you need that process to make sure that you're not overstimulating your system. So even with the water tower, you don't want to do something that's going to draw down all your water pressure on one day. And so, making sure that you have that spread out makes sense. When those subdivisions were developed, they kind of had that in as just a process, but because it wasn't part of the ordinance, it's not something that requires it. This will actually require it.
So what do you think, going back to the water tower itself? My understanding is, at least in recent years, there's been really two locations that have fallen through.
Yes.
You said it's back to the drawing board. Is part of that drawing board, because my understanding, again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that just geographically, in terms of the topography of land that is needed for a water tower to function appropriately and efficiently,
Yes.
there's very limited locations that would actually fit the bill.
Correct.
So is a part of that drawing board considering eminent domain?
Wouldn't say that right now. I don't know. I think there are additional options. There are other properties that we could look at. The issue is that it becomes extremely expensive to put a tower there and then actually have to pipe the water down. And so what you would have to do is kind of wait till you have more development occur in that area. Then when it would make more sense to actually build something there.
My last question on the water tower, and we'll pivot away from it. Is there a timeline in your mind for the water tower moving forward? Like, if we can't get it in the next 2 years, 5 years, we need to do something else, or then we consider something like eminent domain.
I would say that there are other options that you can look at. There's, if you don't do a water tower, you do some type of storage facility where you can actually store water and still be able to pump it down. And so there are other different options. We're not at that critical mass where if we don't have the water tower, then we have issues with fire flow. I mean, the most important thing is to make sure that if there's a fire that occurs, the fire trucks can come, they can connect to our water hydrants, and they can actually fight the fire. That's your benchmark. It's trying to mitigate how people water their grass is more of, okay, here's how we're going to have to regulate.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I'm done with the water tower.
Well, let me just ask one. You're talking about the Thornbrook area.
Yes, sir.
And there's a water tower out there.
Yes.
That's,
But it's
I understand that's not
It's a different system. They treat their water differently.
Still saying there is physically a water tower there. So if you're worried about the
Look,
looks of the area, there's a water tower there.
right, and it hasn't reduced the property values of the houses that are around it.
Well, related to water, not water towers, one thing that has been discussed in work sessions, and it wasn't mentioned in your State of the City address, but I'm sure it's relevant, which is rate increases are being discussed for water and electric again. Is there any comments you'd like to share on that? I know
Sure.
those are under discussion. Nothing's finalized.
Right. It's interesting. So a lot of people will say that government needs to operate like a business. And how do you have those business principles when you're trying to make sure you're providing that service? And so when you have your utilities, the best way of looking at how do you charge for your utility is looking at your cost of service. What does it cost to actually do the operations? And if you can build that in, you can make sure you provide something that will actually be equitable throughout your community. And so that's what we're trying to do, is really looking at what the cost of the service is. So we are a service organization. Biggest part of our budgets is usually our people. And as you're looking at salaries and benefits and equipment, especially for utilities, the equipment is a huge part of it. It's really having that ability to actually make those incremental changes. I think the hard part happens is when we decide that we don't want to do a incremental increase, and then you wait until you're at critical mass, and then you have to do a large increase. And so instead of doing a 1.5 or 3%, you're doing a 10, 15%. And that's could be devastating. And so it's really looking at it and kind of growing it as you should, as you go. I think the hard part for a lot of people is our electric utility. There's this part of thing where we have to pay for power, and that cost of paying for power can get extremely expensive. And we saw that a couple of years ago where we end up having to go into our reserve funds, and I think to the tune of about $25 million, because the cost of power was so high at that period of time. And so if we're not making those incremental changes, you find yourself where you can bankrupt your system.
I think what you say makes sense, but I understand as a consumer, it's scary
Absolutely.
because I think in the pre-council meeting, the most recent council meeting, there was a presentation and I looked at that and I didn't understand 90% of it, but what I did understand was when they got to what their recommendations were, everything is going to have an increase.
Mhm.
And I'll accept that. I know a lot of people will throw a fit about that, but at the same time, if you're looking over many years and seeing year after year a percent increase, it's like, wow, I'm not sure whether I'll be able to afford that or not. It's what goes through the mind of someone if they just skim the surface of it.
Absolutely. And I think that's a part thing is because it's when you say percent wise, when you say it's a 3% increase, or if you say it's a 5% increase, and it's like, oh, wow, that's a large increase. When you look at the dollar amount, it may be, 50 cents or, a dollar. And so what is that true impact? I think the other part is really looking at how do you make sure that we can provide those systems to make people, so if you can provide programs where someone is doing things that'll allow for their to use less electric, we do energy efficiency, energy efficient windows, energy efficient air conditioning units, those things that will kind of reduce their use, it will actually bring down their costs. The same thing with no water. There's efficiencies that we can help people do in their homes that will make their home more efficient, which should bring down the cost for their service.
We may move on to the next. One of the other topics that I circled from your State of the City address has to do with housing. I'm curious as to how much of housing is directed by the city and how much of housing is directed by private developers.
Most of it's directed by private developers. Now, the city can be part of some of those conversations, but the housing that is being built by the developers in our community.
If I, hmm, I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this. One of the things I think I noticed last year, and I'm sure someone listening is going to know the answer off the top of their head, but I think I saw last year, based off the numbers, that the housing authority may have been the largest single family home developer because of their redevelopment of some of their properties.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that is a quasi-governmental entity
Yes.
that obviously is partnered closely with the city of Columbia, ran by a former city employee, Randy Coles, their CEO, great guy. Within the city, as you just said, the city's not a home builder,
Correct.
doesn't want to be a home builder.
Correct.
What do you want the city focused on? What do you want it prioritizing from a housing standpoint, or from the quote unquote affordable housing standpoint, whatever that means?
And I think that's it. I mean, the realization is that we need housing on every spectrum. You need the expensive homes. I mean, they are a property tax producer. They are where a lot of people want to live. You need workforce housing. So if I'm a young person who's trying to get into the workforce, can I afford to have my own home? You need the moderately income homes. And so it's really trying to make sure that we have a wide spectrum of homes being built in our community. The larger homes will be built. I mean, those are the things that a lot of our builders are building. It's trying to figure out how do you empower someone to help us do some of that workforce housing and add more of affordable housing. And what is that number? And I think that's that missing piece, and it moves. You're right. The housing authority was able to do a lot luckily because of a lot of the funds that came from ARPA. Well, those funds from the federal government has really made a huge impact in our community. And so it's trying to meet that need for our residents.
Here's a fun question. I think it's fun at least. Is I know we have realtors and home builders who listen to this podcast. What is something you want them to know that you wish more of them knew?
Yeah, I think it's the city wants to be a partner. And so I think a lot of people feel like, well, the city is just this regulatory authority and they just want to come out and harm the builders and build balance the city's budget on the backs of the builders. And that's not the case. Now, we really want to make sure that we're partners with it. And if there are things that we're doing that are impediments, let us know. But let us kind of work together in order to kind of get to where we need to get to.
I have nothing to. That makes sense to me. Mark that one. What do we do? Check that one.
Well, I think a good transition from housing is another priority you listed in your address, homelessness.
Yes,
Obviously, those two are very much connected.
absolutely.
It is getting its own strategic plan
Yes.
for the city on how to address it. Could you speak to that? What does that look like? Why is that happening?
Yeah. So the city has been doing a lot to, kind of help our unsheltered neighbors. We've done a lot in order to try to find a place for people that are in that need, but it's been reactionary. We reacted to seeing people on the street. We reacted to seeing people stand at the different hotels. But we really need to have a strategic process on how can we really make an impact. We know in order the answer to homelessness is housing, but how do you get people to housing? And the strategic plan should help us get there. And so it's really trying to take a proactive approach to dealing with the situation as opposed to just reacting to what's coming down the pike.
I'm curious as to what a proactive approach means, and
Yeah.
how do you implement that? What's the implementation parts of that?
Yeah, part of it's working with some of our social service agencies that are actually working with that clientele and figuring out exactly what are their needs. What we know is that, and I think it's a hard one because there's different aspects of homelessness. And so there's not a one size fits all. To some people, it may be mental health. It may be substance abuse. To some, it's I lost my job and I need a step in order to get to where I need to get to. And so it's really looking at how do we provide systems that can kind of impact everyone. And what does that look like? And how do you work with those people in need to make sure you can get them there? It was interesting. I went to the Welcome Inn and I went with Kip Kendrick, and because they received some funding from the county, from ARPA from the county, and just toured the facility. And there are, I think, 300 residents that are staying at the Welcome Inn. There are about 50, 60 kids that are staying at the Welcome Inn. And that's one of the places where the school bus picks up kids. And so it's an extended stay hotel that's really geared toward those people who are that one step to homelessness. And we have a lot of that in our community. And so while people may look at the person who's on the sidewalk or in the median and think, well, that's homelessness in Columbia, there are so many people that are just one step away from being there. And without assistance, it could be devastating for our community.
I appreciate what you just said, because the question that I was going to ask as you were answering that, I had it already formed in my mind, and now I don't really need to ask it. But when you walk through downtown, which I do regularly because I live close to downtown, and I'll walk from one side to the other side, I'll see 4 or 5 people that I'll say, I think they're probably homeless. I don't know, but they appear to be. And that is the image that many people have of the homeless in this community. And I think what you just said broadens that out necessarily so that people will understand when you're talking about the homeless situation, you're not talking about the 4 or 5 people that would say, hey, could you help me with $1 today?
Absolutely. You're talking about those kids that they're either couch surfing, or they're staying at that extended stay with their parents, and they are one step from being on the street.
I think a nice connector for this is the Opportunity Campus,
Absolutely.
something that the city and I believe the county as well helped fund using ARPA dollars.
And they also received some funding from the state. And so
Yes. Yeah.
it was a huge initiative that was not just local, but it was also some state
Yeah.
funds that went into it.
And private enterprises invested as
Absolutely.
well, local businesses. So with the Opportunity Campus, that effort has certainly been front of people's minds. It's kind of been the flagship, so to speak, in terms of this is something the city and our community as a whole is doing about homelessness, right?
Correct.
Amongst other things, because obviously, well, not obviously, for some folks don't realize the Opportunity Campus is not just for that.
Correct.
Could you share from your perspective as city manager, what role do you see the Opportunity Campus playing in our community, whether it's for homelessness or other challenges that our community is facing?
Well, and I think that's exactly it. I mean, it's not just a homeless facility. It is where a lot of social services agencies will be. There will be a health clinic there. There will be a place where people can actually get foods. So it's places where people can get meals. It's places where people get social service. It's places where people can get medical care. It's really providing that service for our residents that are in need in one location. By the way, they also will have the overnight shelter and they'll also have a day center. But the opportunity to have a lot of activity happening at one place is a one-stop shop. And so, people can go there just to say, okay, I need to go to the clinic or I need to, get lunch or to get dinner. And so those opportunities will be there. And so for us, I think it will make a huge impact for our community. I know there's no, it's you hear it on both ends. You hear, oh, this is the greatest thing or it's the worst thing. The reality is that there are people in need in our community. And if there's not a place for people to go, it'll only be worse for your community.
I think another aspect of this that I know I've heard from folks is it took a lot of dollars to ramp this up. A lot of those are one-off dollars from state, city, feds, whomever. And some folks have expressed concern about, well, how is this thing going to sustain itself? Because
Yes.
essentially not essentially, it is a nonprofit
Yes.
organization. Voluntary Action Centers is the administrator and facilitator of it all. Do you have any concerns around the longevity in terms of its sustainability in existing and operating?
Well, I think that's a big part of what you have to look at. And so, I mean, they do have a model on how they're going to operate. Some of the agencies that are located there are paying rent. They have some funding that they get from the city. There's some funding that they get from the state. And so they do have their funding mechanism in place. And so it's really trying to make sure that those things stay current as they move forward.
You address public safety in your State of the City address. What do you want people to think about when you are taking time during your day to focus on public safety?
Yeah, we're not the small town anymore, and so there's a lot of growth that we've occurred, and we have not grown our agencies to kind of live up to that. We just built, since I've been city manager, it was since I've been with the city, we built Firehouse 10 and 11. We're about to rebuild Firehouse 5. We have a lot of infrastructure that needs to just be taken care of. Our main police precinct is over 100 years old, and that building is at end of life. And so there's those needs. When I became city manager, it was interesting. We couldn't hire police. We couldn't hire firefighters. We were down so many employees, and it impacted the service that our residents were receiving. And you heard the complaints. You heard the people complaining about speeders. You heard the people complaining where they didn't feel safe in their neighborhoods because they didn't see police. We like to believe, and we stated that, no, all our policing is community policing. But if your officers are just going from stop to stop to stop, they don't have time to really invest themselves in the community. And so in order to have true community policing, you need the officers to do it. And so it's that function. The one thing I'm proud of when you look at our communities, we've done a great job of what we have. When you look at major crimes in our police department, we have a 100% clearance rate. And so if there has been a major incident occurred, we've been able to make that arrest and we've been able to close those cases quickly. When you talked about our fire service, that they are able to respond quickly. We're starting our own testing where we're testing actually having paramedics on a shift to try to provide some critical medical care. And so it's really trying to grow the operations. And so that's been a goal and we're getting there, but the need is still there.
When you listen to the police chief talk and when she says something like, we don't have traffic enforcement unit anymore, we're down in detectives or investigators, it's amazing what is accomplished.
Absolutely.
But it lets you know people's complaints come because there are inadequacies or vacancies there.
Oh, absolutely. When our traffic unit has one person And so if there is a critical accident that occurs, you don't have a unit that can kind of go in and control that scene to do the process to make sure they understand exactly what occurred so that we can respond quickly. We don't have the units doing the DUI enforcement. And so those are the things that you really need. And so you need to build your force in order to do that.
So, very timely for us. We're recording this after a council meeting where council unanimously voted to put the public safety tax of 1% on the ballot come August.
Correct.
That is going to be, I imagine, taking up all the oxygen in the room
For a long time.
between now and then.
Absolutely.
What do you want voters, citizens, and their own voters to keep in mind as they're chewing on that over the summer on whether or not to increase their sales tax on themselves, right, by 1% to help fund public safety in this case, staffing for the police department, staffing for the fire department, pensions, facilities, equipment, technology, all these things that it seems objectively the city needs it, but the citizens are going to have to decide for themselves, do they want to fund it?
Before you answer that, because truth in advertising here is, as we are doing this right now, just a block or two away, the county commissioners are talking about also putting something on the August ballot that would be a tax increase to build a jail. So in addition to what Nick just asked, figure that in, factor that in.
That's a great segue. So, I'll really speak to Columbia. And I think you're right. It's really for the residents to decide what do they want to see in the service. We know what we're saying that we can do. We can bring back those units that really will make an impact in our neighborhoods. One of the things that you look at is, how do you help a neighborhood protect themselves from certain elements? We have the people that would go in and they'll, check to see if the door of your car door is unlocked. And if the car door is unlocked, they go in and they take the stuff out of your car. And that happens a lot in neighborhoods. But there's things that you can do through policing that can kind of help neighborhoods protect themselves. And so making sure you have those conversations. It's the technology. When we look at the flock cameras, which, people may say is controversial, I would say that since we've installed flock, you've been able to see things occur that have saved lives. We had a car stolen out of a hotel parking lot that had 2 kids in it. And through the use of flock cameras, we'll be able to locate that vehicle, reach out to the highway patrol, and the highway patrol was able to make that stop, make that arrest, and save those kids. That's what's important. It's really investing in ourselves, and it's having that conversation with our community members about what that investment looks like, and making sure that they're come along with on the road. And I know the county's looking also. I think what you have happened is all levels of government are really trying to figure out how do we provide that critical service that residents need.
So another aspect of this that you mentioned in your address is that CPD is hitting its 200 years of existence.
Absolutely.
That's notable. I think again, it's a nice coincidence that that's happening at the same time that the city is making this push for a public safety tax. Reflecting on the last 200 years, which none of us were here for all of that, what do you want the next 200 years of CPD to look like, whether as a result of things like this public safety tax or just in general? It could even just be high level. Like, what do you want the next 200 years of public safety in Columbia to look like?
Well, what I would love for us to have is that every resident feels that they are protected. Every resident feels like they're safe in their neighborhood. They're safe in their community. It's where, who that officer is who's walking down the street, who's doing patrol in your neighborhood. And you're able to have a conversation with them. It's kind of going back to how it was 20, 30 years ago, where the officers drove around and they had, they had the baseball cards with the pictures of the officers they handed out to the kids. And it made that connection. It's how do you provide that connection so people feel like they are part of those solutions?
We can move on to one of the other later in your address. You talked about parks and recreation. I would like for you to put in perspective for those who live in this city, why you included that as a major point in your address and how important that is in your mind for this community.
It goes back to the whole thing about connections. One of the places where people connect is our parks. So it's where we have our barbecues. It's where we play basketball. It's where we connect with our neighbors. It's where we have those opportunities to really touch point with people. And Columbia has lots of gorgeous parks. I mean, our trail system is phenomenal. And creating that place for people to really connect with each other is so important. It's that part of government that has more of an outreach and more of a touch that people feel that they really don't see. And understanding what that aspect means is important. I look at our park system and I'm extremely proud of what we've been able to do. And I'm hopeful for what we'll be able to continue to do.
The same time, it brings things to Columbia
Absolutely.
because with some of the facilities that exist now, you're able to bring things in from a national attention as well as regional attention.
Absolutely. You look at just the field house. We just completed the phase 2 of the field house. Those courts are now full for tournaments. And when you go out there, it's loud, but it's a loud that's really exciting because you see so many kids just playing basketball and really enjoying that recreational space.
It's competitive also because
Absolutely.
Lee Summit or the Kansas City area, they'll host softball tournaments and soccer tournaments. Jefferson City could, Sedalia could, Boonville says they want a new hotel for
A-
sporting events happening there. So, I mean,
Absolutely.
you got to stay on top of this.
Absolutely. And you have to compete.
Well, and this touches on the Convention and Visitors Bureau
Yes.
aspect of this, right? Obviously, there is a close relationship between Parks and Rec and the CVB on attracting those sports initiatives. Based off your address, you had said in FY25 there was $577 million in spend alone from tourism that was generated by tourism in the city of Columbia.
Yes.
And those are direct tax dollars, right? The number one source of income for the city is sales tax.
Correct.
And so that spend significantly impacts the pocketbook of the city of Columbia and therein the services it's able to provide.
Absolutely.
So it's all connected. I am curious, one thing that came in the last budget work session that the city recently had, it was going through the funds, through the utility funds, through the infrastructure funds, capital improvement, et cetera. And when it got to the Parks and Rec Fund, it showed kind of farther out than the others that there's a potential for it to go a little in the red. And that was, if I remember correctly, according to Gabe Huffington, the director of Parks and Rec, primarily as a result of overhead from staffing with the increase in minimum wages and having to account for that in some capacity. Do you have any concern there?
No, I mean, when the Parks and Rec was established, it always knew that there's going to have to be a funding mechanism from the general fund. It's not completely self-sufficient. It does provide a lot of their own funding for their capital projects, but some of their staffing needs need to be covered by the general fund, and that's part of our process. But it's really understanding exactly what that impact is. We try not to have a large fund balance in our parks, and so that's the reason why that number is so close.
What do you want to see? I know we're starting to wrap up here, so I'm curious as to as you look forward to the next year or beyond, what do you want to see in regard to improvements? And I mean, I'll be specific on this: city-county relationship, city-MU relationship, city council, city staff relationship.
And so I think, Nick attended our staff council retreat this last week. And trying to build that relationship is extremely important. And relationships are how we get things done. I think at times people on the outside will look at our relationship with the county or look at our relationship with the MU or some of the other universities and feel like, well, there has to be this disconnect because people aren't getting along. And in reality, that's not the case. We work very well collaboratively together. We have routine conversations about what can we do better and how can we work more in order to make sure that we're all aligned in our processes. There's always going to be differences of opinion. There's always going to be disagreements. But if you can find that commonality and realize that we're all kind of reach for that same goal, I think we'll be successful.
When you say, why did X do that? And you question that in the confines of your private office here, are you able to get on the phone and ask that person, say, I'm a little curious as to why this is happening or what you intended when you did this?
Absolutely. And that's part of the process. It's actually having those conversations and saying, okay, how can we do this better together?
Gosh, I think that's
Yeah, building a
building a
stronger.
Columbia together.
That's it.
So I'm curious, you've been city manager now 5 years, been with the city longer than that. What's changed the most from your time coming to City of Columbia to now?
Probably the thing that's changed the most is that we're at this point now where we're able to actually have the staffing to do the things that our citizens want. I mean, for the longest time, the city was on this spectrum where because of concerns about finances, we weren't given raises. We weren't, and so because we didn't get raises, we couldn't hire. And because we couldn't hire, we couldn't retain. And you saw this thing where because you didn't have enough police officers, that your service started suffering. You didn't have enough people doing street improvements, so your infrastructure started suffering. And we've been able to turn a page and started to do those things that have really made a huge change. I'm excited about the airport. When I got here 7 years ago, we were in two double wides and the only thing we had to eat was those
Rice cakes or whatever those things were, as dry as could be.
Absolutely. But we have a phenomenal facility and we've been able to add resources. And so we have American, we have United, and now we have Allegiant who's going to Destin and Orlando. We have this growth that's occurring, and we have a restaurant that's about to be built out. We have more parking that's being built. We've had this phenomenal resource that is now a regional hub. And so those are things that are exciting. This city's growing, and we're growing by leaps and bounds, and it's just making sure that we maintain that growth correctly.
Very clearly in your address, and you say, I think you actually say it right. It's all about service delivery. And you've said as much in our conversation here today. It's all about delivering services to citizens, what they're expecting, what they're paying taxes for. That is done. The city does that through, as you note, it has 1,600 employees across 19 different departments. That is the vehicle through which those services are delivered. First question is, how do you manage that?
Uh, that's the reason why I don't have any hair. No.
You and me both.
So it's what we are. I mean, we are a service agency. We put people in vehicles and offices to provide the service for our community. It's why I got into local government, because I believe in service. And so how do you manage it? You manage it through making sure that you have enough voices at the table that will allow you to have successful processes. It's about engaging people. It's about communicating. It's about letting the residents know what we're doing. And it's about owning when you make a mistake. I think a lot of times in government, we tend to not want to talk about our mistakes. But if you're going to provide this service, you're going to have times where you're going to stumble. You're going to have times where you're going to trip. But it's how do you respond to that that's important.
With the vast variety of services the city delivers across a very large organization, are you concerned? Do you become concerned, or is there a concern perhaps about what is often called mission creep? I
Yes.
know a lot of nonprofits concern themselves with that.
Yes.
They are just service providers. City, the largest city provider within the city of Columbia. What does that mean to you? What is that concern?
It goes back to what government does. What are our core services? And we do a lot that's outside our core. And so the fear of mission creep is real. We get some grants from the federal government to provide a health program. And at some point that no longer becomes sustainable because those funds are pulled. And then do you continue that program or do you drop that program? For our community, we try to figure out how do we continue those programs. And so that's kind of ingrained in our DNA. But it's if we look at what our core is, it's about providing streets, it's about providing public safety, it's about providing good parks. But we do so much more in Columbia. And so that's who we are as a community. And it's making sure our community members are involved in those processes.
I kind of had a question that I see as related to that, and I wrote it down much earlier in our hour together. How much does the city move on its own, and how much is the staff and council directing what happens? And I ask that because this is the first time I've been in your office. And so you're overlooking a historic hotel, you're overlooking a lot of historic buildings, and then I can see over that an industrial looking student housing thing. And I'm just curious as to when you look out on the city and you ponder what's happening in Columbia, how much of it is like, well, that's out of my control. I'm not in charge of that. And it goes back to what Nick just asked you, how much of that is also city directed and city needs to have a hand in.
That's exactly it. When you look at Columbia, the south side of Columbia is moving and it's growing on its own. And it's not a whole lot the city needs to do in order to stimulate it. But there's things we need to do to protect and make sure that we're directing things. When you look at the north side of town, there's so much that needs to be done. And so how do we get investment on the north side? And what does that look like? How do you build out those plans to allow for development to occur in a lot of green spaces that need it? How do you provide for additional restaurants? I built a house northeast, and it was interesting. I wanted to order a pizza, and so wanted to have it delivered. And I went to Pizza. We don't deliver it over there. Papa John's, we don't deliver over there. Domino's, we don't deliver over there. And so I had to actually get out of my car and leave to go get pizza because no one delivered in that neighborhood because those resources aren't there.
Yeah.
And so how do we build those resources to make sure that people can get that quality of life no matter where they live in Columbia?
I think that's a really good answer. I have one more question. So the conversation is ramping up about paying city council and the mayor with salaries that would be like full-time job salaries. How would that impact, if that came about, and that's an if that came about, how would that impact you in doing the job here as city manager?
Well, it really depends on what that looks like. Is if it's still a city manager form, then my job is still my job, and the job is to provide that service to our residents. I think what they're looking at is there's a demand to be on the city council, and there's a demand for what residents feel that they need to have those connections and those touch points. And so, how do you compensate for that? That's outside my pay grade. I think that's more of a community conversation, but that becomes part of that process. When you look at Kansas City, which does have a city manager form, and their council are paid well. They're not full time. They're part time council. But I think the average salary for a council member in Kansas City is around 70 to 80,000. I think the mayor makes around 130. That's that reality. And so it's really having that look and seeing what it makes sense for Columbia.
I think like we've said a couple times now, it's that question will ultimately be up to the people of Columbia,
Absolutely.
because I know any change like that would have to go to a vote.
Absolutely.
And so I imagine we'll go farther down that path and see what that looks like, because there's a million different ways somebody could organize that kind of effort. DeCarlon Seawood, City Manager of Columbia, thank you for joining us today. Any last comments you want to leave to our listeners? Anything in general?
I think the biggest thing is that when you look at Columbia, you look at a community that's growing, you look at a community that's developing, you look at a community that's on the move. I'm excited about the things we're able to do. I'm excited about where I see the future heading. And it's just making sure that I want residents to be part of that. I want people to understand that their voice, their energy will lead to what makes us successful. And also the state of the city will be, oh, I guess this is going to be after the state of the city. So I guess I have to plug that. But it's really about having their energy toward our processes.
I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show with us. We appreciate it. For our listeners, this has been the Como Vanguard podcast. You can go to comovanguard.com to see the written publication, submit questions and comments for the show, and support the show. All things Como Vanguard will be on the website, and we will see you next time.